This talk is brought to you by the Bamberg Mathematical Consciousness Science Initiative.
Thank you for allowing me to be the first speaker for this wonderful workshop. And I'm going to take some liberties in being the first speaker by starting with something very controversial. So I'm going to start by saying what phenomenology is not. And I think this is important because somewhere along the line, our field has become a little disoriented with this concept. And I'm hoping in the next 2 days and through the initiative of Bamberg, we can, through our colleagues, reorient the field to what phenomenology is and isn't. So, what phenomenology is not is subjective first person experience, the redness of red, what it is like, or introspection. I know these are sort of slogans or truisms that people often use in talks and papers, but if you really think about it, this is not what phenomenology is. What phenomenology is actually is a system of essential laws of properties that constitute experience. So these are invariant properties of experience which are present in all aspects of experience. They're related to each other in a precise, objective way. And they're thought to pervade not just conscious experience of humans, but also other conscious entities. And in today's talk, I just want to introduce time as one essential property and discuss some of its law-like regularities. So when I say that time is an essential property of experience, what I mean is that the that the structure of experience and the contents of experience are both temporal. So let me use an analogy from how we can represent speed to try and show you how it can have essential or non-essential properties. So let's say you have a speedometer like in your car. It can represent speed by pointing to a value. You could also represent speed by anemometer, and this is something that we use to measure wind speed. So here you have like cups on spokes which catch wind, and this whole apparatus rotates at the speed of the wind. So here, the speed is an essential property of representation, whereas here it is still represented without being an essential property. So there's the distinction I want to make before I get into the talk is talking of time in terms of necessary and essential properties. In both these cases, time or speed is a necessary property, but only in one case it's essential. By essential, I mean it's constitutive of its representation. And when I'm going to be talking about time in this talk, I'm going to be talking in this essential way. The second thing I want to clarify is what are the aspects of time in conscious experience? So generally people think of time only as change, but that's not true of temporal experiences, because when it comes to time and experience, you have things like duration, order, anticipation, flow of time, persistence of contents of experience, them being open for revision for precise durations, flowing in one direction. And when I say nestedness, I mean that each moment is constituted of its past history and the upcoming anticipation. And all of these properties are sort of anchored in a present now. So with this in place, what I'm going to be talking about in the rest of this talk is introducing you to a bit of phenomenology and philosophy of time, bringing together disparate fields of inquiry about time perception, timing in neuroscience, and the phenomenology of time. I'll, I'll speed run through some empirical data from my previous work on showing some regularities across these properties. Then I'll show you how we can investigate these essential properties of time in seemingly private domains like mental imagery. but I'm hoping to spend relatively more time on this idea of how we can study non-human minds through these essential properties of time. So when it comes to phenomenology, the way people have conceptualized temporal evolution of mental contents can be broadly classified into these three schools of thoughts. So the first one is called cinematic, where the idea is that your experience is like the frames of a movie. They're discrete pulses which quickly succeed each other. And they're so quick that you cannot grasp the gaps between them. The other one is sort of a naive view on time, which says that both the structure of experience and the contents are extended in time. So for each moment of the evolution of the structure of consciousness, you have a persisting or evolving content of experience. And the third one is what are called the retentional models. So here you have an instance of experience which constitutes the just past history of your experience and also the upcoming or anticipatory or forward looking aspects of experience. And generally, people have thought of these as exclusive explanations of how things work. So generally people propose only one of them is true. But the problem is that all of them capture some aspect of your experience which the others don't. But people try to argue that any one of them can capture aspects which the others propose also. Similarly, in psychology, when people study distortions of felt time, there are distinctions on how or what kinds of distortions can occur in felt time. So you can have things where you can have a mismatch in the change or order of events. So one example of that is the flash lag illusion, which I have playing as a GIF here, where you have an object moving across space and another object that flashes actually perfectly aligned with this moving object. But what you actually perceive is this green dot lagging behind the red one. The other kind of distortion in your experience which can happen is what are called oddball events. So let's say you have a repetitive stimulus that's being presented, in this case, an image of a shoe, and then you suddenly have a novel stimulus. The novel stimulus is perceived as persisting for a longer duration than the previous repetitive stimuli, even though it's of the same actual duration. So here what happens is the duration of this oddball event is constitutive of the past history of repetitive stimuli. Finally, you can also have distortions of time which are about how you anchor an entire event. So for instance, if you're dropped from a great height at an amusement park onto a safety net, you might think that your fall lasted for a very long duration, but you don't actually perceive things in slow motion such that you might be able to see um, stimuli hiding behind a flicker. So that doesn't happen. So the idea that I'm trying to convey here is that distortions of felt time can happen at different time scales, and they can have distinct phenomenological nature such that you can have a mismatch in changer order or the temporal context or the entire event without really having uh, perceiving things as slow frames and so on. Similarly, when it comes to neuroscience, people have thought of distinct temporal windows of integration being indexed by either oscillations, avalanches, attractors, and so on, which index different perceptual or conscious related properties evolving at different time scales. And the idea is that when you look at this as a whole, you see that there are three seemingly disparate avenues of inquiry in psychology, phenomenology, and neuroscience. And all of them propose distinct temporal regularities or distinct temporal phenomena. But there isn't really a way for these to inform each other. So, one of the things that I worked on 5 years ago was an idea to try and bring these together. And what we tried to do was to argue that you can think of a conscious moment as a hierarchical now, which is constituted by all three of these aspects of phenomenological models, such as cinematic, extensional, and retentional, each of them evolving at different time scales. And then what we did was we placed within this scaffolding more than 35 empirical effects from consciousness science, where time was either an independent or dependent variable. And what we did was we placed them both according to their time scale and their phenomenological nature. And I'll briefly show you an example of this. And then we proposed how these different hierarchical levels could interact with each other through a multiplexing framework of oscillations with different frequencies influencing the phase, amplitude, and frequency of each other. And I don't have time to go into all of these empirical phenomena, but they were from attention, action, and perception for things like intentional blinding, chronostasis, continuous flash suppression, change blindness, attentional blink, and so on. So, like, very quickly to show you how we did this using an example. So, we took the standard attentional blink where in a rapid series of stimuli, if you're asked to pick out the first target, if you're asked to pick out two targets, and if the second target occurs within a temporal window of you recognizing the first target, you fail to see this target. And we argue that this is because you fail to consolidate the extended series of your experiences into a retentional moment of your experience. Whereas you can have another kind of attentional blink, which happens at a faster time scale. Here you're shown frames instead of letters, which together constitute a complete image. So for instance, you can be shown two diagonals of a square. So the blink that happens here is people do see both of these stimuli, but what they cannot tell is the order of T1 and T2. And we thought of that as an interaction between the cinematic and the extensional level, where you cannot grasp individual frames, but you can have them as a whole. And with this, I mean, if you're interested to know more about the different interactions that we propose between these levels and so on, you can have a look at this paper. And what we did from this paper was we tried to come up with certain regularities or law-like relationships between the contents of your experience and the structure of experience. And I'll quickly go over two of them, which is the structure matcher thesis and the idea that distinct aspects of your experience evolve and devolve over different time scales. So to show that perceived time is constituted by perceived experiences, we looked at the phenomena of bistability. So here, let's say you're looking at a Necker cube, and your current percept of the Necker cube is in this particular fashion, where this ambiguous figure appears to you as if it's pointing downwards on the left. If you continue looking at it, at some point, this percept switches such that you see it facing right and upwards. And this switch seems instantaneous, even though it takes some time. So what we wanted to show was that when a perceptual switch occurs, you lose both the awareness of the contents of this cube and the perceived time uh, of the switch. So what I mean is, let's say you have the same interval with and without a perceptual switch. We propose that there would be a contraction of felt time when there was a perceptual switch. So here what we showed was that if we place a repeating stimulus inside an echo cube, just like a number sequence going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 repetitively, when the cube switches, people actually miss out on seeing one of the numbers. So it might look like the sequence went 1, 2, 4, and as if 3 was absent from your experience. And there we argued that you lose perceived time when the cube switches because you lose perceived content. Then the second thing that we did to test this framework is to say that if different aspects of your awareness evolve over distinct timescales, then it should be possible for us to perturb these levels selectively or exclusively to perturb specific aspects of your experience. So for this, we used a paradigm called the continuous flash suppression. So this is a paradigm of binocular rivalry. So what happens here is you present a flashing mask to one eye and a target image to the other eye. And people's experience of this is a fused percept, where they initially only see this flashing mask, and then slowly this target image emerges from behind the mask. And so far, the standard in these studies had been of using a mask that flickers at 10 hertz. And this comes from this idea that consciousness evolves at this particular frequency. But what we did was we said that uh, we wanted to show that we can use 4 different experiments which target 4 different temporal regularities of your experience, which was how contents enter or break through into your awareness, how your attention samples available contents, how perceptual inputs are bound together, and how contents decay from your experience. And what we showed over these 4 experiments is that each of these different temporal aspects of your experience can be maximally perturbed at these 4 different frequencies within the CFS paradigm. Now, again, I mean, if you want more details about how we went about this, you can check out this paper which came out this year where we discuss these 4 experiments in more detail. Now, moving on to another regularity between these distinct timescales. This comes from majorly from the work of Harold Atkins Parker, who proposed, also like us, that there are distinct timescales of experience and they're related to each other in a particular mathematical fashion. So they proposed this particular relationship, which says that the window of your experience is a function of the stability of a percept divided by the resolution of your experience. So speaking more paradigmatically, what this means is that you can think of the stability of a percept as the dwell time of a bistable percept. So how long you continue to see a Necker cube in one particular way before it switches would be the stability of your percept. And the temporal resolution would be the limit at with which you can tell the order of briefly presented stimuli. And what they showed was, specifically with meditators, that if you have a finer temporal resolution through training of attention and so on, you also have longer dwell time. So you continue seeing an Necker cube in one particular orientation for longer durations. And this relationship is maintained to have consistent windows of experience. Now, what we wanted to do with this particular relationship is to test whether we can extrapolate whether this relationship also holds in contents of experience which are seemingly private. So what we did with this was look at whether we can use this particular relationship to equate contents of experience between people. So let's say I imagine a particular event in my mind's eye, and you imagine it in your mind's eye. There is no empirical way to show that we have the similar essential properties constraining how contents evolve in my mental imagery and your mental imagery. So what we wanted to do was to see whether the contents of mental imagery are constrained by this relationship. So we developed a series of tasks which we called the phenomenological property matching tasks. So what we did here was we asked people to imagine a square flickering as fast as they could or a box rotating as fast as they could. And on a screen, they could adjust the flicker rate or the speed of a rotating box to match with how fast they could do it. Similarly, we asked people to watch very short clips of a dance sequence or a sequence of exercise and then recreate the smoothness with which it evolves, again, by adjusting the smoothness of an actual video clip playing on the screen. And finally, we did it to measure the stability or the extent of the contents of mental imagery. We presented people with a repetitive or persisting video clip of a winding road or a running tap. And we asked people to insert breaks in a animation on the screen which matches the point at which the content of their imagination broke, and they had to put effort to recreate that content. And we ran this study online with more than 800 participants, and many of them, or almost 700 of them, did all of these tasks. And what we showed was that just like perception, these temporal aspects of mental imagery evolve at distinct time scales. And more importantly, the stability, which is the temporal extent of imagined contents, and the temporal resolution, which is like the flicker rate, follow this relationship of maintaining identical windows of experience, similar to perception. Even though the temporal resolution of mental imagery is much more sluggish than the temporal resolution of perception, and proportionally, the stability of mental imagery contents was much more stable than visual perception. So overall, here we showed that there are, just like perception, there were distinct temporal phenomena in mental imagery, such as temporal grain, smoothness, and persistence, which evolved over distinct time scale, and temporal ability, such as temporal grain and temporal stability, were related to each other in a similar law-like manner as in perception. Right. So, the point of doing this exercise is, me trying to reiterate that if you look at phenomenology as this essential relationship of having these distinct temporal properties and a law-like relationship between them, not only can you start investigating things which seem private, but also equate things between people. And what I've been doing to further extend this idea over the last 2 years, sorry, again, I mean, this is the mental imagery thing is also a paper that came out this year, and you can have a look at it. But coming back to like what I was saying, what I've been doing for the last 2 years is looking at whether these essential laws and the law-like relationships also hold for animal experiences, like what uh, prominent philosophers or phenomenologists have been proposing for the last 100 years. So, in phenomenology, once you identify an essential property of experience and its law like regularity, it has to hold true for all conscious experiences. And what this means is it's not only true for all of my experiences, irrespective of modality or irrespective of time points, that is today, tomorrow, and day after, but it also holds for you and all your experiences and also all time points of your experiences, but also for all possible conscious experiences. So, for the remaining 15 minutes or so of my talk, I want to focus on how we can do this for non-human experiences. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this concept of Umwelts, which is proposed by von Uxküll. And his idea was that that nature partitions access to reality distinctly across species. So different species are, for instance, sensitive to different spectra of light and different frequencies of audition. And they can also have entirely different modalities, for instance, chemosensation being sensitive to electromagnetic waves, or um, using things like sonar and so on. So the nature of experience is only one partition of all of reality. And these sort of ideas crept into consciousness in the sense of overplaying the hand on privacy. So, for instance, the classical challenge by nature uh, of creating this unassailable wall between us and others, of saying that experience is so private and subjective that we can never know what it is like to be a bat. Even if we have all behavioral, physiological, psychological facts, we can never know what it is like to be a bat. And one reason for this is because there are no common scale to Umwelts, right? I cannot imagine what it is like to be a bat because I don't have a sonar. I don't know what it is like to be a self of a bat. We don't share similar perceptual modalities, nor do we share the ranges of the modalities that we do share. And the question that I've been sort of dealing with for the last 3 years is to ask if there is a way out. And of course, if you've been following this talk for the last half an hour, you know what I'm going to propose as a way out, which is to think of time as a common scale to Umwelts. And let me walk you through how people have already thought of using time as a common scale, and then show you what more can be done with this. So one thing that people have looked at so far is what is called the critical flicker frequency threshold. So as you may know that all artificial lighting, including the screen through which you're seeing me right now, actually flickers, right? But it flickers at a rate beyond which you can see the flicker such that it appears steady to you. And usually the rate of flicker can go at 60, 85, 120 hertz, and so on. But flicker sensitivity varies greatly across species. And I mean, depending on their metabolism and environmental niches. So you can have flicker sensitivities as low as 4 hertz in deep sea isopods to them being as high as 500 hertz in black fire beetles. And this idea has been prevailing for the last 50 years or so. And I think more than 120 species, like people have tried to taxonomize their critical flicker frequency thresholds across more than 100 species. And this led to this idea that um, different animals have a different frame rate. So if I show you a scan path of a fly that moves around my head, in my perception, it might look a little bit like the panel in A, but the same fly path might look a little more granular when viewed through a flycatcher or a bird or a beetle. And this sort of led to the notion that distinct animals might be seeing the world in slow motion. Similarly, people also looked at it as a relationship between prey and predators. So let's say that you have a squirrel and you can plot the time series of its actual movement. And then when this movement is viewed by another squirrel, which has a high temporal resolution, you can take the first order integral of this movement and say that this is how another squirrel would perceive the motion of one squirrel. But if you look at how an owl, which is trying to hunt, the squirrel would perceive its motion, because the owl has a poorer temporal resolution, it might be perceiving its motion as a second order integral of its motion path. Now, the problem here is that all of the talk of critical flicker frequency thresholds is at one single time scale. So if this is an owl trying to hunt the squirrel, and if it can see its movement only as a second order integral, it also has to plan or act according to these timescales. But that's something that's been very rarely considered. So, like, just to show you the absurdity of using a CFF as the timescale of experience, if I show you an LED board which has some information flowing on it, you might see it at a railway station or as an advert and so on. The only thing that a CFF threshold can tell you is whether any singular point in this LED display is seen as flickering or not. It cannot tell you whether an animal perceives apparent motion. It cannot tell you the rhythm at which it attends these stimuli. It cannot tell you how fast they can consolidate inputs in their working memory and so on. So the point that I want to make is it cannot tell you, like CFFs cannot tell you anything about these temporal aspects of experience. So what I've been working on recently is trying to taxonomize many of these properties across different animals. And I will talk to you a little bit about revision, persistence, anticipation, and nestedness. So one way in which you can study this is through temporal illusions. So what I have on the screen right now is called the peripheral drift illusion. So here you have alternating high contrasts of light. And if you move your eyes over this pattern, you experience motion because perceptual contents in your vision are bound in an asynchronous manner where light like transitions from light to dark are processed faster than transitions from dark to light. And these sort of illusions are present across animal species. So people have shown this illusion in macaques, mice, pigeons, Drosophila, even in fish, where where the contents of visual perception are revised asynchronously. Similarly, there's the idea of flash lag, where um, the latency of recognizing motion is shorter than the latency of recognizing flashed stimuli. So again, this has been studied across rabbits, macaques, salamanders, and so on to show that they perceive the flash lag illusion. The cool part is that the latency differences between extrapolating motion and registering a novel flash stimuli actually predicts the magnitude of this illusion. So if I show the same stimulus to a monkey and a human, both of them would perceive the flash lag, but the magnitude of the solution would be much lesser in monkeys compared to humans, because the asynchrony of flash and motion is much lesser in monkeys than humans. Similarly, you can also study ecological ideas of like how these flash lag like illusions play out in the real world. So this is a phenomena that people study in ecology called escape by motion dazzle, which is the idea that organisms like butterflies, which have high contrast patterns on the upper side and the lower side of the wings, is because when these contrasts are flashed really fast in time, they create transitions of going from dark to very bright. And these transitions make a potential predator underestimate its spatial location or misestimate its spatial location, making it harder for it to anticipate its spatial location in time. And again, these high contrast patterns on animal bodies have been studied in insects and snakes and other reptiles. There are also really cool demos if you wanted to try out this for yourself at this website called the Dazzle Bug, where you can try and catch insects as they move across the screen. And these insects have different striped patterns, and you can see that it's harder to catch these targets when they have high contrast alternating patterns. You can also study how perceptual contents are revised across time. So one way this has been studied in humans is through an illusion called the continuity illusion, or the phonemic restoration effect. So here, let's say if I tell you a phrase like "Happy birthday to you," but I cut out one phoneme and replace it by noise, such that in the middle of "b" and "day" there is no rith, but only pure noise. You still hear what you would have expected to be in the noise if the noise is for a very brief duration and immediately followed by a signal which completes the word. Similar things have also been shown in squirrels and starlings, where they also have this sort of continuity illusion uh, where they complete the noise as having a signal, but the durations for which these continuity illusions happen are very different and distinct. Um, Coming back to attentional blink, as I was talking to you in the beginning, so this time window for which you cannot consolidate more information while you're busy while your attention is deployed on one target, has been shown in distinct species with distinct windows. So again, you can taxonomize properties like deployment of attention and consolidation of perceptual contents into working memory as occurring over different time scales. Uh, for the last perceptual effect, I want to talk to you about change blindness. So here what happens is you have two alternating frames separated by a gap. So I don't know how well this comes across in Zoom, but what is happening here is you have one image, blank, and another image. And people find it really difficult to find the change when these two scenes are separated by a gap. And the critical temporal variable here is the duration of the gap. So if the duration of the gap is very small, you can immediately recognize this change. And again, people have looked at what is the critical duration of this gap in distinct species. On the left is a study from pigeons, and on the right is a study from chimpanzees. So for pigeons, the change blindness phenomena happens even if the gap is as small as 7 milliseconds. But for chimpanzees, this gap has to be around 80 milliseconds, which is quite similar to humans. Um, I mean, I had something on pain, but I think I will skip that for now. So what I want you to think about from this talk, and like what I want people, like what would be really cool if people across consciousness science or phenomenology start doing is start thinking about phenomenology as it actually was. That is about essential, invariant, and law-like regularities of the structure of experience and its relationship to contents. And time is not the only such property. You have several phenomenological properties which can be regularized in this manner. But you can study time as an essential property through its distinct aspects, as I discussed, things like revision, persistence, duration, anticipation, flow, and so on. And these can be formalized, taxonomized, and empirically investigated. And they can help us create structures of experience which can be comparatively studied in non-human minds. So thank you for your attention. You can write to me at any time, or I'm happy to have discussions and answer questions. Thank you so much.